What's up, patrons, and welcome to the first class in my new course on drawing clothing from your imagination. This course is called Introduction to Cloth, and the reason I called it Introduction is because I might make a more in-depth course later if the need arises, but I'm going to try and cover every single possible topic that I can within this course itself. So it's just 4 lessons, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're currently in the first one. So today we're going to be talking about the 3 basic principles of drawing cloth. So next week we're going to be talking about the what I call the poncho exercise. Week after that, I'm going to be explaining seam and thread theory, which I think is the most effective way to go about drawing cloth. And finally, on week 4, we're going to go a little bit more meta, and we're going to talk about how to think as like a fashion designer or a costume designer or an outfit designer when you're drawing cloth, because that's also quite important, especially if you're doing things like character design. So anyway, let's save that for later. For now, we're going to focus on just the 3 basic principles. Okay. So let's begin with the first one. Now, when we talk about cloth, what I want you to do is, I want you to approach cloth not as a solid object. So when we think of, let's say a t-shirt, right? So when we think of a t-shirt, I think it's very easy to look at a t-shirt as like a single object. Obviously, it makes perfect sense that we would consider a t-shirt as a single object, right? But I want you to not think of, like, when you're drawing clothes, don't think about let's just say the t-shirt. Don't think about the t-shirt as a single object and then think, okay, where do the wrinkles go? Where do the folds go? Where do the tension points go? Like, don't approach drawing cloth in that way. The reason I say that is because obviously the most effective way to draw cloth is if you understand it, correct? So when you understand how something behaves, you don't really need to rely too much on references. And it's when you rely on references that you actually start asking the question, okay, where do the wrinkles go? Where do the this and that go? So what I'm going to teach you in this course is how to understand cloth, because that'll make your drawing much, much faster. So let's reframe this conversation a little bit. I'm going to pull you away from, we're not doing this right now, okay? So we're just going to take this and we're going to put it over here. Then we're going to turn the opacity all the way down so that, so we don't see that anymore. Okay, so what I want to focus the conversation on when it comes to cloth is a very simple concept of movement. So specifically, not just any movement, but I want you to think of falling. So we're going to go over 3 concepts. The first one is falls. The second one is bunches. And the third one is seams. So let's tackle the first one here, and we'll get to the second and the third in just a moment. What do I mean when I say falls? Well, there's a missing word here. What I actually intend to say is that cloth falls. And now this may seem obvious to you. I mean, yeah, obviously anything on a planet, like anything that's on a planet is going to fall because gravity, right? But specifically what I want to talk about when I say cloth falls is that, let's erase this all for 1 second. Okay, so I have a cloth here. Let's assume that this is a handkerchief of some kind, maybe. Okay, so we have a handkerchief. When I say cloth falls, I don't mean it literally in the sense that, oh, okay, this is an object that has mass and therefore gravity pulls it down. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is that every single inch of a cloth, every single inch, in fact, every single nanometer of a cloth independently tries to hit the ground. And the difference between cloth and anything else is, it looks a bit like this. If let's say this is a crate of some kind. So this is a crate. If on top of this crate, if I place another crate like this, like, so that we have crate 1 and we have crate 2, and we're going to assume that like majority of crate 2 is sitting on top of crate 1, right? So assume that that's a majority. So in this scenario, crate 2 is on top of crate 1, but crate 2 is not falling. There's an entire section of crate 2 that is completely suspended off the ground. So when I say every inch of a cloth attempts to fall, what I mean is that if this was a cloth, okay, so you see the piece of fabric here? This is a piece of fabric and you left it like that, it will not stay like this. This section of the fabric will always try to hit the ground. And because it's being held over here, it's not going to obviously hit the ground. It's simply going to hang limp off the edge of this crate. And so this is what I mean when I say that cloth falls. So when you draw cloth, you need to think of the fact that every single inch of this thing is constantly trying to find a way to the ground. Now, the reason that this is important is because, okay, here's our cloth and our cloth is falling to the ground, right? Now, what happens if we add an obstacle in between the cloth and the ground? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. The cloth is going to hit this. And like I showed you in the crates example, that the part of the cloth that hits the circle is going to stay there and the remaining parts are going to flop down. So in practice, this will look something a bit like this. So the cloth hits the circle and then the bits of the cloth that aren't in direct contact with the circle will simply flop down, just like that. Obviously, it doesn't shatter like this. It's going to take this shape of the surface. But this is basically what happens. So that is our first principle. Think of cloth as a material that's always trying to find some way to hit the ground. And when you put it on a human, let's assume this is the human is simply blocking its path to hitting the ground. And because cloth doesn't have any structural integrity, naturally it takes the shape of whatever obstruction is in its way. So that's the first principle that I want you to keep in mind. Our second principle is, like I said before, bunches. Now, something very crucial to remember about cloth is that cloth always holds its dimensions. Now, don't freak out when I use heavy words like dimensions. All that means is if we had a t-shirt, all I mean by dimensions is the length around the t-shirt. Cloth will always maintain the same length from one spot to another. So this sleeve will be the same size, this sleeve will be the same size, this central section will be the same size. That will never change. So why am I telling you this? Well, it's because, say for example, there is a person. Okay, so they're raising their arms like this. When you look at, let's say for example, when you look at a t-shirt on a person like this, it's very likely that the t-shirt won't really have the shape of a t-shirt. In fact, quite roughly, a t-shirt would look something, especially a loose t-shirt, it'll look something like this. Something like that. So here the shape of the t-shirt hasn't changed. The only thing that has happened that makes this t-shirt, that has made the sleeves of this t-shirt disappear is that, you know how we discussed in the first principle that cloth always tries to hit the ground? So because of this quality, the sleeve that should have been here has simply slipped downwards. So the sleeve that should have been here is now over here. Obviously, when that happens, the next question to ask is, okay, there was so much cloth in this space here. What happened to it? And that's where we get to the concept of bunches. So cloth, so remember how I said cloth always holds its shape? Well, extension of that is that cloth will never change its shape when you apply pressure onto it. So what actually happens when you do apply pressure onto cloth? Well, I'm sure I already know it, but if you had a square piece of cloth and you applied pressure from either side, what happens is the cloth simply starts to bunch up. So what are the two rules we've learned so far? First of all, cloth always falls. Second of all, when put under pressure, or in other words, when pressed from two different sides or multiple sides, cloth always bunches. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, a seam in a cloth is anywhere there is a stitch that holds the shape together. So this changes from outfit to outfit, obviously, but most t-shirts have a seam here, have a seam here, one seam here, one seam here, one here, and one here. Now these things are technically called a hem, but for the sake of making it easier to think about, I'm going to refer to this as a seam. So a t-shirt is composed of, if you're wearing a t-shirt right now, you can look at it for yourself. A t-shirt is always made of two seams here, two at the end of your sleeves, and one at the bottom here. Now, why are these seams important? Well, you know how I said that the first principle of cloth is that it always tries to find a way to hit the ground? Well, the heaviest part of any outfit is usually the seam, which means before any of this tries to go to the ground, the seam will attempt to go to the ground first. And that is why this happened. The seam that was here travel downwards because the seam is usually the first one to go downwards. So when you're drawing cloth, always think about how the seams are going to behave. So just to show you what I mean, let's take this person over here. I'm going to turn the opacity down. Let's put a t-shirt on him. Now, as we discussed earlier, the t-shirt has 6 seams. So one is the neck, one is the outside of the sleeve, bottom, and then the connecting seam between the sleeve and the main torso body. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seams that we're dealing with. So when you draw a character or a figure or whatever, first, now obviously you don't need to draw the whole human like this. First, draw a sketch of the pose, and next, think of the outfit that you want to put on this person. And if it's a t-shirt, of course, I'm gonna go over that example. But if it's something other than a t-shirt, think about how many seams that outfit has and where each of them are going to be. So in this case, we know that this one sleeve is going to be somewhere here. One sleeve is going to be somewhere here. We know that the neck is going to be there, but it's not currently visible because his arm crosses in front of his neck. And finally, we know that this the bottom opening is going to be somewhere here. Okay? Oh, we have 2 more, sorry. We have this one and this one. So we know that this seam is going to be somewhere there. I'm sorry, somewhere here, because it usually sits between the arm and the chest. So it's going to be somewhere here, here. And the other seam is going to be, again, between the arm and the chest. So somewhere there. And also keep in mind, tighter t-shirts bring this inseam closer to the chest. And in looser t-shirts, this tends to move away from the chest. So in a more loose t-shirt, the actual, this inner seam would be somewhere here. All right, so back to what we were doing. So we know that this is where each of the item is going to be. Let me just map them out for ease of understanding. So now, think about what I told you about obstruction, okay? So a cloth falls, and then it hits the object, and then it takes the shape of the object, right? Now, use that logic on the seam. For example, this seam is, it's a rectangle, right? It's basically like a rubber band. So how would a rubber band hang off his arm? Well, it would probably do something like this. And the same is going to work over here. Okay. Now we have our sleeves. I think these are 2 different sizes, but that's fine because this is just an example I'm doing. Next, of course, we have the outer thing here, and that's going to be, it's just going to wrap around his body. And so we're not doing a very tight t-shirt. Let's say it goes like this. The reason I left some space here is because, once again, if you just dropped a cloth on him, this cloth would come over here, and then at this point, everything beyond this point is just going to fall downwards like that. So because the cloth hits him here, it's obviously going to hang just like this. That's why I pulled this all the way out here. If it's a tighter t-shirt, then that will not be the case. If it's the tighter the t-shirt, the less space. So in a super body tight t-shirt, it's going to come somewhere here, and it'll just hug the shape of his body. In that case, you don't really need to worry about anything. Anyway, because we're doing something loose, so let's do that. And finally, the inseams, they also tend to fall a little bit, but you need to remember that these seams all have threads traveling between them. So they kind of pull on each other, which means if this falls downwards, then this one gets pulled towards it. But in this case, we know that he's folding his arm over his chest here, right? Which means the seam over here is probably just permanently stuck there between his arm and his chest. Because of that, this is not going to move anywhere either, since it's being pulled on by this one. So that's how we bring this over here. Now, I'm not going to get into how folds and wrinkles work, because that's what we're going to do next week. So for now, I'm just going to draw the wrinkles off my own head. Oh, I'm sorry. This will not be like this. This will be something more like that. Just make sure that you're always maintaining realistic distances between the seams. So, I mean, this and this has to be the same. So if this comes here, then this would probably be somewhere here. And so once you have the basic seams down, there's one more thing you need to remember when it comes to t-shirts, is that typically it tends to be one more seam that travels along the side, something like that. So we know that this seam goes somewhere here, which means this one will probably go somewhere there, and then obviously this side will have its own one, but that'll be behind his body. So it, like, behind his body, it'll come somewhere like this. And once again, always remember, everything tugs on each other. So this one will tug on the one that's on the other side, this one will tug on this, this will tug on this, this will tug on this, this will tug on this. But again, don't worry about all of those details, because we're going to cover all of that in next week's class. So for now, once we have our main seams down, just like that, we simply connect them. So obviously, now this is an easy one. This goes over here, that goes around, and then that comes a little bit outwards like that, because we are wearing a fairly loose t-shirt, so it's not going to hug his body, obviously. Remember that this seam is a full circle. It goes all the way around, right? So this thing will connect over here. As again, you can check this in your own t-shirts. and we will have a few wrinkles like that and then a few like this. Once again, I'll explain this in the upcoming class. So we have those. Over here, the sleeve is fully stretched to its maximum, so we don't see a lot of bunching. But in this place, the sleeve is kind of just like folded under his arm over here. So because of that, we will see a little bit of bunching because his arm is pressing that way against this bit of fabric. Because of that, we will see a little bit of bunching over here. And remember, the thinner the fabric, the more wrinkles you're going to see. So other than that, we connect these two and then we can simply go down like that. And yeah, we have very basically a t-shirt drawn just like that. So I'm going to get more into detail about how the seams and everything work together in next week's class, because in next week's class we'll be learning something that I like to call the poncho exercise. And the poncho exercise is simply a very basic way for you to understand how these wrinkles are created and how the relationship between this the different seams of an outfit work, like how they pull against each other and all of that. So that is the purpose of the poncho exercise, which we'll get into next week. So everything that I taught you here is still quite applicable. So the next time you draw cloth, maybe you draw it today, maybe draw it tomorrow, it is the weekend, think about the 3 principles that I taught you and you should see some immediate improvement. So see you guys in the next one. Happy drawing.